Chris Carter here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Today we've got Alan Saunders and Art Rooney, the Steelers owner, finally spoke to media yesterday. I want to talk about what he said, and specifically when he said actions speak louder than words, when he understands the frustrations of Steelers fans. What actions could he be talking about? We'll talk about that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things on the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show in your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes, as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the number one sportsbook in America. Super Bowl 59 is here, and there's no better way to make every play more exciting with FanDuel Sportsbook. New customers can bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. Download the app today or head to FanDuel.com to get started. As I said before, we're joined by the man himself, Alan Saunders. We're here talking Steelers, and it's a big day because Art Rooney did speak yesterday and finally getting some sense from him. But all in all, not a huge wave day for Art Rooney. Granted, that's never really been his style, nor has it been the Steelers' style. But a few things that I thought were interesting to be acknowledged by Art Rooney. One, saying he understands why people are mad. He says all I can say is actions speak louder than words, and we've got to be better. And I hear that, but Alan, I think when people hear that, they're like, okay, so what are the actions? And he says, hey, we're sticking with Mike Tomlin. He's like, hey, don't expect wholesale changes at the coaching staff, but does acknowledge there will be some changes. What is your sense as far as like what are these actions that he plans to when he plans to be at the head of as the owner of the Steelers?
Well, I'm going to do this before I answer the question, and I'm just taking over, even though it's your podcast. But you have a little video game deal over your left shoulder there. I don't know what it is. It's always there.
Oh yeah, it's my Marvel versus Capcom mini console.
Airbnb has Buck Hunter Pro.
Oh snap!
Buck Hunter Pro.
Oh snap!
So I just want to show off because right?
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool.
Chris, Art Rooney said actions speak louder than words. And then said, "There's nothing I can do right now." Basically, I mean that's pretty much what he said. That the theory of what he said is the big problem with the Pittsburgh Steelers has been the inability to find a difference maker at the quarterback position, and there is not much hope for a change in that right now. And so I think if you believe that, then all you're doing is making change for the sake of making change. And I'm not saying that there isn't some value in that. Probably is. But I also can understand a lack of willingness to do that. So if Art Rooney really believes that the biggest problem with the Steelers is their inability to find a solution at the quarterback position, that they tried once on Kenny Pickett, didn't work out, and Art said there's nothing to be learned from that mistake, which I will disagree with, but I'll respect his answer. If he believes all that, well, then there isn't much he can do right now because there is no answer coming through that door at quarterback better than Justin Fields or Russell Wilson in 2025. And there isn't a whole lot of reason to think that either of those guys are going to get the Steelers to where they want to be either.
And see, that's the thing here is that, like you said, it feels kind of stuck, right? Like you're talking, if he's talking about, hey, actions speak louder than words, he understands, but then he goes into like all the reasons why, like, listen, it's not going to change a lot right now. And to a degree here, you also understand it's not like he's speaking out one side of two sides of his face there. He's right. Like the Steelers, if they made wholesale, if they blew it up right now, fire the coaching staff, trade away TJ Watt, you're not okay. You do all that, you're still not getting the quarterback of your future right now. And then you become much worse. And then you can say, okay, maybe you can find him down the line, but then you throw away every chance to inherit for that quarterback that you eventually do go get down the line to inherit something that can be of a winning culture that can say, hey, you're inheriting a slightly above average team that can get to the playoffs. If you make them decidedly better, they become better than that, and then they are a more dangerous team. That's kind of what happened with Ben Roethlisberger when they got him. And granted, they were 6-10 the year that they got him, the year before they got him. So like it was a little different. But he inherited he inherited a team with a really good run game. With a tough defense, with playmakers on offense, and it was a plug in the situation. And it was such a big lift from Tommy Maddox to him that they were 15-1 his first season, and they were immediately contenders in those years under Bill Cowher. And so that made for a thing there. I think the point that he's looking at here is like, look, like we know what the situation is. This is a quarterback-driven league, and we don't got the quarterback that drives. Now, we like the two guys that we got for now, and Russell Wilson, Justin Fields, and we'll get to that whole situation, how they talked about that, as well as his comments on Kenny Pickett. But all in all, I think his point is like, look, we know that we got to be better, but we also have to stay the course right now if you're the Steelers. And that's where I do agree in the sense that blowing up your attempt to become more like the way that the Eagles are building right now when you brought in Andy Weidel to help Omar Khan, that's not going to help you get to being like that team right now. And I think that is the ultimate point here is that, look, like I know Steelers fans are impatient because they haven't seen a playoff win since the 2016 season. But at the same time, you're not going to get one any faster by just hitting the reset button over and over and over again. And he also kind of made that point is that like the league averages anywhere from 6 to 8 new coaches a year. And that doesn't always lead to great results.
Yeah, I mean, look at the number of coaches that have been hired since, let's just say, since COVID, so 4 years. Like, how many of those guys worked out to be way better than Mike Tomlin? Like, is there one or two? Like, maybe, yeah, but like your chances are low. So, like, you're committing to probably doing that. Like, everyone likes to point out that the Eagles moved on from Andy Reid and then got back to the Super Bowl with Nick Sirianni. They don't like to point out that the first coach was a failure and they got worse in the interim. Like, so I think you have to look at the Steelers and say, okay, this is still a playoff team. They were 10-3 at one point. They probably underachieved on defense, given their talent level. Is this a team that it makes sense to blow up? Or is this a team where it makes more sense to do what you're talking about and just try to continue to incrementally get better until you are able to make that big splash at the quarterback position? You said they had to go. They went 6-10 when they drafted Ben Roethlisberger, but they picked him at 11. The Steelers have already traded up to 10.
Yeah,
not that long ago to go get Devin Bush. It's not that hard. It wasn't that painful to go make that trade. Like, you can go get your guy if he's there to be had. I think right now the problem is, not there.
Yeah, this just isn't a quarterback draft year. This isn't the year to go get, Arch Manning or, whoever the big guy that you want next year. And maybe that is the thing. Maybe it's next year you want to be there. But as I've brought up before in the show, the Chiefs, when they went and got Patrick Mahomes, they were the second seed in the AFC. They traded up. They were 12-4 that season when they traded up to the 10th overall pick to get Patrick Mahomes. And granted, that don't always work, but you can do it, especially when you build an offensive line, playmakers into your offense, a defensive core, which that's what they're trying to get right now. They have a defensive core. They're trying to make sure that they have a good offensive line. They're trying to get better playmakers. I think that's the mission this year, is to set those things up and then have most of those heading in the right direction, and even to the point where they're proficient, so that when the quarterback comes in that you draft, and whether you want them to sit behind a year 3 Justin Fields or a year 3 Russell Wilson or whatever, you at least have something that they can inherit, that they're not coming in and having to make things up on the fly. Because whereas it really worked out for Jaden Daniels, that don't always work as we see in the NFL with young quarterbacks. Look at Caleb Williams and what he's dealing with, and what Ben Johnson's going to have to quickly turn around. And to your point about Andy Reid, and I brought this up on the Final Word Sunday night. People love to bring that analogy up, but they always leave out the part where Andy Reid left the Eagles, created maybe the greatest dynasty in football, because if they win a Super Bowl this year, they'll have won 4 in 6 years, which ties the Steelers in the 70s, which nobody had ever done. And by the way, if they win this Super Bowl, they will have beaten the Eagles, the team that let Andy Reid go. Could you imagine if Mike Tomlin was fired by the Steelers, created a 4 Super Bowl run for the Cowboys and in the process beat the Steelers twice, this town would be livid with itself about that. So and I'm not saying that, hey, if you fire Mike Tomlin, he's just going to win 4 Super Bowls somewhere else. But stop using the Andy Reid analogy. It's stupid.
I guarantee, like, if Andy Reid beats the Eagles in the Super Bowl again, and nobody in Philly could be walking around with their chest puffed out about how they successfully moved on from Andy Reid. None. Zero.
Yeah, it's just it's there, and look, if they win this time, great. You finally got one over him. He still created a 3-time Super Bowl champion dynasty, and Patrick Mahomes is still 29 years old.
Would you rather have Andy Reid or Nick Sirianni as your head coach right now?
Yeah, I think that's a pretty easy question. Pretty easy question right there. So stop using that comparison. It's fine if you want Tomlin fired because he hasn't won a playoff game in a while. That's your business. But don't use Andy Reid. It's dumb. It's short-sighted. But we got to take a break. When we come back, I want to talk about Art Rooney's commitment to still being a team that can run the football well. Is that what the Steelers need to be? Can they be that kind of a team? That next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, I want to remind you this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. Super Bowl 59 is here. 1 game, 2 teams, endless possibilities. And there's no better way to make every play more exciting than with FanDuel Sportsbook. Whether it's predicting the first touchdown, calling the MVP, or even betting on the coin toss, FanDuel makes it easy to get in on the action. With live betting all game long, you can adjust your bets as the game unfolds and feel the thrill from kickoff to the final whistle. The live betting feature lets you stay involved no matter what happens on the field, and the app is super easy to navigate. Plus, you can place a $5 bet and potentially win $200 in bonus bets for the Super Bowl. The Super Bowl odds have opened with the Chiefs as 1.5-point favorites over the Eagles, with the over-under set at 49.5 points. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. Bet just $5, and if you win, you'll score $200 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Bet with FanDuel, official partner of Super Bowl 59. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Alan, another thing that I thought Art Rooney was it was interesting that Art Rooney said, and he said there were a lot of different things that were said, and we can't cover everything in one show, and I will probably try to stretch this out a little bit, but he talked about the run game and still wanting to be a team that he's still believing that running the ball is the path to success. He said, quote, "We've got to build on the strengths that we can put together. I still think that running the ball is a route to success, particularly when you are playing in the north and outside." And then he also brought up, he said, "It's interesting. We have 2 teams in the Super Bowl with such different styles. It shows you can win with more than one approach. I think the bottom line is you've got to try to win with the talent you have in the building, and they have 2 different kinds of talent in their building. So it would be an interesting game. Talk about the Super Bowl with the Chiefs and the Eagles. We've got to build on the strengths that we can put together in our room, and I still think that running the ball is a route to success, particularly when you're playing without a roof and outside, things like that." Alan, clearly he's talking about the 2 teams, and the team that the Steelers are more like are the Eagles. And granted, the Steelers aren't close to being what the Eagles are right now. They still have ways to go. But like I said, the week that they were going to play the Eagles, I said, look, the Eagles were going to win this game. The Eagles are what the Steelers want to be, and they're probably 3 years ahead in that process. The offensive line is developed, they're experienced, they're talented. Heck, the Steelers stole their worst lineman in Isaac Seumalo, and he became a solid contributor for the Steelers to help there. They want to get their offensive line to be working. They're trying to rebuild their trenches in the defensive line as well. I think that's a big reason why that's a target this year in the NFL draft. But I think that, again, this speaks to the Steelers saying, like, look, we know it's not going to be pretty yet. We know it's not going to be a Super Bowl contender yet. But to get there, we got to go through this process to be this identity. And I don't think that this is some illogical or bad overall plan. It just takes time. It just takes time to build there. The frustrating part, I think, is they need to be right in getting the pieces to build there, because Broderick Jones hasn't turned into a superstar yet, and that's going to be frustrating if year 3 doesn't work for him. They need Zach Frazier and Mason McCormick to keep going in the right direction. They need to see Troy Fautanu on the field, and they need to see some continuity on the offensive side of the ball, because that just hasn't manifested. Even when it looked like it did for the middle part of the season, it fell off at the end of the year. They need to feel like something is pointing in the right direction, especially offensively.
Top 5 teams in the NFL in rushing attempts this year: Philadelphia Eagles, Baltimore Ravens, Detroit Lions, Pittsburgh Steelers, Washington Commanders. You're in the right neighborhood, right? Like that's where you want to be.
Right.
Okay. But Eagles 4.9 yards per carry, Ravens 5.8, Lions 4.7, Commanders 5.0, Steelers 4.1. Okay.
Yeah.
So it's not the idea, it's just the execution. Okay. And at some point, and I don't think we're there yet, but at some point, you probably also need to acknowledge the lack of execution when it comes back to the idea part. For example, remember the Bengals game in week 18, the Steelers, who had thrown all over the Bengals the last time they played against them, said, it's going to be cold. We don't think we can do that again. We're going to run the ball 100 times. And it didn't work. And there was no reason to think they could run the ball 100 times because by week 18, you are who you are, and you should know that you're not very good at running the ball this year. It's fine to want to be there. I think it's also fair to point out the Steelers weren't very good at it this year, and they probably should have done a better job of coaching around that weakness instead of leaning into it down the stretch of the season.
And I think that's part of what needed to happen, right? Was like, look, if you knew you weren't running the football well, you needed to have an alternative plan, and one never manifested. I mean, maybe they tried. I mean, they clearly tried different things. They were trying to get Russell Wilson to get a rapport with different guys. George Pickens missed an important part of that stretch, But at the end of the day, it's your job to figure out when you're missing a thing that you want to be your strength. You got to figure out other ways. Otherwise, you're going to end up losing games like you did at the end of the season. And that's where that's where it falls down on Mike Tomlin and this coaching staff to be like, look, you got to develop something here. And if it was a better rapport between Wilson and Freiermuth, or we're getting Mike Williams more involved, something that could have been a difference maker for the Steelers. And I think that's where next year there has to be part of the plan. Now, Alan, something that you and I have talked about off camera, on camera a lot is, even if there's not wholesale turnover from the Steelers coaching staff, adding to the Steelers coaching staff needs to be a thing, and soon. A colleague of mine, Brian Batko in the Post-Gazette, wrote in the Post-Gazette over the weekend about how the Steelers and their coaching staff is very lean, and they're tasking their coaches to do more than other coaches. Whereas, while they have to game plan, they have to do the analytics, they have to, handle things in game, they have to mentor the players. There needs to be more divvying of some of those tasks. You and I have talked about getting senior offensive assistants, senior defensive assistants, finding different guys, having, people that are specifically dedicated to different parts of the game, a run game coordinator on both sides of the ball, a pass game coordinator on both sides of the ball. And those people not being also your wide receiver coach or your D-line coach or anything like that, but having people that can help isolate things and make it a more team project from the Steelers coaching staff. I think that's part of what the Steelers need to help get them there. If they're outmanned in the personnel side of things, because they're still rebuilding, because they're still fixing the O-line, still figuring out who their top playmakers are for the long term, still figuring out who their quarterback is going to be for the long term. They need to be able to outman other teams in some department, and maybe that needs to be coaching, where you have more manpower because you are investing there, and that's where I think it does come down to the Rooneys to open up their purse strings on that.
Say a quote from my buddy J.P. Finley down in D.C., from Dan Quinn's press conference yesterday. He said, Quinn says Washington is prepared to lose assistant coaches, and that was part of building a big coaching staff to develop from within on the staff. And I think, when you look at that Washington coaching staff, because it was just put together this year, so they were coming at it from a holistic approach. I'm not sure that, Art kind of pushed back on the notion that the Steelers have this super small staff. If you count guys like Ryan Shazier and Vince Williams and DY, who are not technically listed in the Steelers media guide as assistant coaches, but functionally are assistant. I mean, they're at every practice, and they're performing coaching responsibilities at every practice. So you can sort of quibble with the numbers, right? And say well, maybe it looks like they don't have the level of the number of coaches that other teams do, but really they kind of do. But when you look at the guys on this staff, okay, you have Dan Quinn, you have Brian Johnson as assistant head coach and offensive passing game coordinator, who was just an offensive coordinator in the NFL. You have an offensive coordinator in Cliff Kingsbury, who was just a head coach in the NFL. You have a running game coordinator in Anthony Lynn, who was just a head coach in the NFL. So, it's not just the numbers. It's about having guys you're talking about for these extra positions that teams have that the Steelers don't, that are also highly qualified coaches for those positions. I'm not saying anything bad about Vince Williams and Ryan Shazier. I'm glad they're on the coaching staff. Developing their own internal guys should be an important part of what the Steelers are doing. But like saying, oh, well, we actually have these two over here, so we're actually the same as the Commanders. It's not the same. This is the first year those guys have ever coached. That's not the same as having Anthony Lynn and Cliff Kingsbury and Brian Johnson as your offensive coaching trio. Like, that's a big difference.
Or again, bringing in Brian Flores like they did when they did that, because that helped make a difference.
Yeah, and they've seen, and that's the part of this that really I don't understand, is because the Steelers have actually seen the benefit. The defense got better when they added TA to Butts. The defense got better when they brought in Flores and combined him with TA. Why do they think smaller is better? I do not understand that, and I think it's wrong, and I don't agree with it. And I don't really understand why they're so seemingly set in their ways about this. Is it money? Is it just a preference of Mike Tomlin or someone in the organization to have a small coaching staff? I don't know, but I'm not seeing the signs that it's working great, and it seems like some other teams have a better way forward.
Yeah, I certainly think it's the thing that could change. Another thing to talk about here, especially when talking about the run game, Art Rooney acknowledged that there was room for, or there was consideration for a return of Najee Harris, which you and I have been kind of writing off for a bit now, after they didn't give him his 5th-year extension. Just didn't make sense like they would invest in it. But he says, Najee's a good player, and we'll evaluate whether we can bring him back. He's going to have choices too. It's a position that's important to us. We have a job opening in that room, and we're going to have to fill it. Whether it's Najee or someone else, it's going to be an important question. He said, obviously, it's important to some other teams that they've had success this year, so maybe it's not as devalued as some people might have thought, talking about the running back position. I think it's interesting that he says that. I've been saying all along, I thought giving Najee Harris a 5th-year extension made a lot of sense, because it bought you more time with him without tying yourself long-term to him. So that way, if it doesn't work out in 2025 with him on a $6 to $8 million salary, whatever that was going to be, then you just move on from there. You draft a guy, you sign a guy then. But now you're kind of forcing yourself where if you don't sign Najee Harris, you need to go get a running back right now, whether that's a guy in the middle rounds of the draft. I don't think they should get one in the higher rounds of the draft. Like, I don't think they should be going after an Ashton Jeanty or maybe even a Cam Scatabo at this point. I think they might be looking at more like a Devin Neal out of Kansas in the 4th round if they're really taking a shot at running back. But again, now you're saying like, okay, you're going to have to hope that works out, and Jaylen Warren can be your number one with that guy. And I think that's, if you're trying to be a running team, you need to know what your plan is at running back. It can't just be, oh, well, we're just going to hope that this works out. You need to have people that you can count on there. And, if there was something that I thought the Steelers could count on offensively, it was that Najee Harris and Jaylen Warren were a good 1-2 punch at running back.
Well, I don't think you can just go into the year with Jaylen Warren. That's for sure. So you got to come up with something, especially considering he was hurt 3 times this year.
Yeah.
So I think you got to have something besides him. What that needs to be, I mean, it could be a mid-round draft pick. I think that'd be okay. I think it could be a minor free agent signing. I think that would be okay too. I don't expect them to bring Najee Harris back. I understand Art did leave the door open, but I look, if you didn't want him for $7 million, I don't know why you're going to want him for the 12 it's probably going to cost to sign him. So like, I just, yeah,
I'm right with you.
It did. I can't wrap my head around that, him coming back in any way because of that. So, I mean, I think, yeah, they're probably going to move on. I think the bigger question there's another piece of this puzzle too, is that when Najee Harris came to us at training camp on the first day, and we asked him, hey, what did they tell you about why they didn't pick up your contract? And he didn't say, oh, it was about money or whatever. He said they weren't sure how it was going to fit in this offense. And I think there were definitely times this season where we saw Najee Harris kind of looking like a little bit of an awkward fit for what Arthur Smith was trying to do.
Yeah.
And so I think there's an opportunity for the Steelers to align their personnel with what they want to do on offense. And I think you can be critical of Arthur Smith and saying you should probably understand your players better and do a better job of fitting what you're doing to the guys you have instead of the guys you want, going back to the same thing I was talking about before. But I think even if maybe they were close on money, and this was something the Steelers were interested in doing, I'm not sure the Steelers even want a back like Najee Harris as part of this offense going forward.
Right. That's a big question here. We'll keep an eye on those things. Allen's going to be at the Senior Bowl, so he'll be in Mobile giving you his insights there, where there will be some running backs, including Devin Neal, on display, and we'll see who the Steelers take closer looks at. I'm always intrigued to see who does Mike Tomlin spend that most of the time with on the field with at some point, because usually that's a very good sign of where they're going in the draft. But one thing that Art Rooney also discussed was the quarterback situation. We'll get to his comments on that next here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. But first, we'll remind you the show is also brought to you by LinkedIn. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip. When you add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture you can double your reach to qualified candidates. It's no wonder that 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Alan Saunders of SteelersNow.com. Alan, Art Rooney kind of saying an obvious thing here that we were talking about. I was wondering if there was this super extreme outside chance that Russell Wilson would be willing to come back with not a guarantee that Justin Fields would be the starting quarterback. But Art Rooney kind of brings up neither of them would. Both of them feel like they're starters, and I think both of them have proven they could be starters in the NFL still with the way that they played this past season. And he said, quote, "I think they're both capable quarterbacks, and my preference would be to sign one of them. So that'll be the priority, and I think that will give us the best opportunity to move forward." He says, "I think both of them see themselves as starters. I don't know that they want to share the same job again next year. So I would say most likely we probably don't wind up bringing them both back. I think my preference would be to probably have something more than a 1-year deal in place next time around, but we'll see what it takes." Alan, I think that makes a ton of sense. That, Justin Fields knows that he needs to prove himself as a starting quarterback in the league now or very soon. Otherwise, he's going to be a journeyman backup for the rest of his career. Russell Wilson is in the twilight of his career in his mid to late 30s and wants to be that guy sooner rather than later. I brought up on yesterday's podcast that, maybe Pete Carroll signing with the Raiders could be, a thing that attracts him somewhere else. As Pete Carroll says, "You know what, come back, let's reunite, let's get the band back together there." And that might give Wilson an avenue that we didn't think could be there for him. And I think a 2-year deal with Justin Fields would make a lot of sense for the Steelers because he's younger. You can develop more out of him. I think he has a higher ceiling when you look at the athleticism parts of it. And if you can make those different parts of your offense work, that could really work for the Steelers. I just need to see that the Steelers actually follow through and actually make that a thing because as Art Rooney did here, he didn't leave the door closed on Russell Wilson being the possibility here.
Yeah, I wonder how much of this is like genuine 50-50-ness and how much of this is, well, even if we've decided on Justin Fields, we can't say that because he's going to keep increasing the price, right?
Right.
So, you kind of got to be neutral until a decision is made one way or the other. I do expect them to bring back Justin Fields. I think that's the more sensible direction. Mike Tomlin certainly seemed like he was kind of leaning into that direction when we talked to him earlier this offseason. And so, but I don't think the idea of Russ coming back is off the table by any stretch. If PFF suggested that maybe the Jets would want to take a run at Justin Fields if they're moving on from Aaron Rodgers. If there's other teams out there, it's two-man, it takes two to tango here. So I don't think the Steelers are trying to burn any bridges. I think they're interested in the idea of either of them coming back. I think the preference would be Justin Fields. The other thing that interested me that Art said there about the quarterbacks was that he wants the Steelers, both of their quarterbacks, to be more similar than they were this year, that he wants if he's going to have Justin Fields, he wants another Justin Fields as the backup. There was some talk, I guess it was Mark Cabali, I think, had reported that it seemed like down the stretch run, Arthur Smith and Russell Wilson were on the same page. I wonder how much that was an issue for the Steelers this year, where there was like some things you could do with quarterback A that you couldn't do with quarterback B, and you got this playbook with all the pieces not really lining up and some frustration about the way that all played out. Art actually referenced that directly when he was asked about evaluating Arthur Smith's performance. So I kind of think, man, there's some idea there that this two different kinds of quarterbacks was an issue for the Steelers this year and something they're looking forward to cleaning up going forward. So even if the guys were interested in both coming back, I think the preference would be if it's Justin Fields, then you need a backup that looks like Justin Fields. And if it's Russell Wilson, you need a backup that looks like Russell Wilson.
I think so too. That makes a lot of sense. You have a system that works there, and I think a lot of people then point to, well, what about Jalen Milroe in the draft, because he's a bigger, faster quarterback, and he's also at the Senior Bowl. I think that does make sense, because here's the other thing: when Justin Fields was in the Steelers offense, that was a Steelers offense that was originally designed for Russell Wilson, and like they adapted some things. But now, if you do sign Justin Fields, he's your guy, he's your quarterback, he's your number one. You're designing things around him. You can make the whole playbook about someone having his skill set, and then you could coach someone behind him to have his skill set and say, hey, look, if you're in the game, this is what we're asking from you. Probably a little bit less, probably pulling things back a little bit to protect you, but this is what we're asking of you to do. I think that's something that's reasonable to have there. So I think that's something along the lines here. And I want to call back something that you brought up earlier, because I agree with this. When Art Rooney said I'm talking about Kenny Pickett, it's disappointing that Kenny didn't work out to be our long-term quarterback, and I'm not sure there's a lot to be learned from that. I feel like that that's like that kind of like what? Wait, why isn't there something to be learned? You can learn from everything. It sounds just like when Kenny Pickett was like, "Did you learn from anything from Mason Rudolph leading this offense to 30 points this week?" And he said, "No." Like, I'm just like, poof. What's going on there? That's I always felt like that was the reason why they moved on from Kenny Pickett, because he said stuff like that, and it was just like, well, he don't want to be part. You want to be a backup? Fine, be somewhere else. I'm not sure if that's real, because I do think the Steelers did learn some things from it, and that's informing how they're making decisions right now. In fact, I think how Kenny Pickett handled his situation here is why they're not putting all their eggs in any quarterback basket right now, because they're like, when we did that last time, we had that problem. We're not doing that again until we know that someone's our franchise guy for the long haul. So I don't know, that statement kind of rang a little hollow for me from Rooney.
I'll say this. They better hope that it's not true. Better hope that they found some things to learn from that from what happened. Here's some things they should have learned. Let's start. One, don't have an offensive coordinator that doesn't know how to do his job and a quarterback that doesn't know how to do his job at the same time. You had unproven leading unproven, and it didn't work. You finally fired Canada. Kenny got one game. No one has any do I think Kenny Pickett is great? No, but nobody really has any idea how good he's going to be, because the entire time he was a Steelers starting quarterback, he had a guy who was completely unproven and turned out to be a failure as an NFL offensive coordinator leading him. That's one thing that should have learned. The second thing they should learn is figure out what the heck happened to their personality evaluation of this guy who played college football 8 feet from their office.
Literally across
the hall. Then 1 year into him, 2 years into him being a starting quarterback, the team's stars on defense are out recruiting his replacement. Like, how did you get from A to B in those two places? Those are two things the Steelers should have learned from drafting Kenny Pickett.
Yeah, I thought there was something that needs to learn there, and they need to apply learning those lessons to how they handle the quarterback situation moving forward.
And it makes, like you said, the actions speak louder than words. That's the first thing was said. Then he gave these words. Let's see. They're probably going to take another big swing here in the draft. My guess would be next year at the quarterback position. Better have applied some lessons to that process this time around.
Agree. They need to have learned from their lessons and learn them quickly. And again, clearly, they learned something, because they changed up in how they were doing everything on offense. They brought in a whole different quarterback room. They said, we're not dealing with that. They're trying to be this type of team. I think they have learned things. I think there might be a lack of wanting to acknowledge that was just a bust, and they really not just. It's one thing to whiff on talent. It's another thing to whiff on talent and personality, like you brought up. But Kenny Pickett, and again, that's the thing it was the disappointing part. Kenny Pickett was a heck of a leader at Pitt and used to say all the right things all the time as a leader for the Panthers. And for him to not be that guy for the Steelers, I think that's something there. But again, informing what you got to do now at quarterback. I think that both these quarterbacks handled themselves very well this year. Russell Wilson, I didn't feel like really overstepped himself when Justin Fields was performing well. He even supported him. And then Justin Fields, when he was benched, he didn't pout. He said, "I didn't play well enough." He held himself accountable. And I think that even in not playing well enough, the Steelers were 4-2 with him, and he was finding a way to fight. He was finding a way to make plays and improve. I think if you develop a system around him that's for him, I think that he can do even better than he did last year. And who knows, maybe if you develop a better offensive line, develop a more consistent run game, get another playmaker too in the wide receiver room, maybe you do have something there on offense. And then all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, this is something. This is progress. And even if it doesn't result in you becoming a Super Bowl contender next year, which I don't think it will, your goal next year is to set yourself up so that you say, hey, there's progress. There's something building here. So then, okay, now say this time they won 11 games and maybe they won one playoff game. And now they're not a top 3 team in the AFC just yet, but they have pieces that if they get that quarterback piece to really work, and if they think that guy is in the draft, then all of a sudden they go get that guy. You can afford to spend extra capital to get him because you're so confident in how you've built everything else in your team. And then maybe that's the leap that you can get. But that's, again, going back to Rooney saying that he still feels Mike Tomlin's the right coach and a good coach and, in the NFL. All of that adds up to me to saying the Steelers are saying, hey, we got to stay the course if we hope to pull out of this. Otherwise, a reset could mean pushing you think the Steelers are 3 to 4 years away. A reset could push them 5 to 6 to 8 years away.
Yeah, and I think it's consistent, like you said before. Like whether you agree with it or not, at least it's not like he's talking out both sides of his mouth. Everything he's saying follows a consistent thought and plan and logical process.
Absolutely. Alan, thank you so much for joining us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Alan, you're going to be at the Senior Bowl all week. That's always exciting. Let people know they can find you, follow you, and get more of your work while you're down there.
Yeah, well, you can find me. You come get beat at Big Buck Hunter Pro. Roll up in Mobile. If you want to go down on them sticks, I got it. And then
it's not sticks, they're guns. They're not even sticks. This is sticks. These are sticks over here. This is arcade. I just shook my whole desk. But anyways, finish your
at Saunders _PGH on social media. PGH Steelers Now is my site's account. SteelersNow.com is where you can find my written work, and you can find my podcast, Steelers Afternoon Drive with Zachary Smith and Steelers Morning Rush, on the Steelers Now YouTube page or anywhere you find podcasts.
Absolutely. He's Alan Saunders. I'm Chris Carter. Follow me on Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, Blue Sky, all the social medias at Carter Critiques. Read my work at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, post-gazette.com. Find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every Monday through Friday on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this channel to get all of those daily episodes. Back tomorrow with more on the Steelers and first day of Senior Bowl practice. What notes do we get from there? All here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.